In the mid-16th century, the Netherlands was a restive region under the control of the Spanish crown, ruled by King Philip II, whose policies of strict Catholic orthodoxy and centralized power conflicted sharply with the region's growing diversity of religious belief and strong mercantile culture. Protestantism, particularly Calvinism, was gaining ground in the Low Countries, bringing religious ideals that stood in direct opposition to the Catholic doctrines mandated by Spanish rule. The escalation of Spanish repression, including the Inquisition and heavy taxation, deepened resentment across the Netherlands. Against this backdrop emerged the Geuzen, rebellious groups of nobles, townspeople, and other discontented groups unified by the aim to resist Spanish authority. Two pivotal events would set the stage for the Dutch revolt: the Compromise of Nobles in 1566, a formal plea for religious tolerance, and the Beeldenstorm, a wave of iconoclasm that followed, each spurring the Dutch struggle for freedom and autonomy. By the 16th century, the Low Countries, a collection of provinces including what is now Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg, were valuable territories under Spanish rule, forming part of the vast Habsburg Empire. As one of Europe's most prosperous trading regions, the Netherlands thrived economically, with bustling cities and a strong mercantile class. However, Spanish rulers sought to consolidate power, viewing religious unity under Catholicism as essential to maintaining order. King Philip II imposed the Inquisition, which aimed to suppress heresy, particularly targeting Protestant beliefs like Lutheranism and Calvinism, which were becoming widespread. This religious oppression was compounded by economic strain. High taxes imposed by Spain to fund foreign wars burdened the region's economy, angering nobles and townspeople alike. Such measures, coupled with persecution, created a volatile atmosphere in the Low Countries, where both commoners and the nobility began to chafe under Spanish rule. The stage was set for rebellion, as resentment simmered among the Dutch people, whose desire for religious freedom and political self-determination clashed directly with Philip II's absolutist aims. This resistance would soon coalesce into a formalized opposition, leading to the rise of the Geuzen and a demand for change that was symbolized in the Compromise of Nobles. Amid growing unrest in 1566, a group of nearly 400 Dutch nobles united to present the Compromise of Nobles, or Compromise van der Edelen, to the regent Margaret of Parma, the representative of Philip II in the Netherlands. The document, drafted in April of that year, formally requested an end to the Spanish Inquisition in the Netherlands and greater tolerance for religious differences, specifically calling for a pause on punitive actions against Protestants. Organized by leading figures like Hendrik van Brederode and Louis of Nassau, the compromise was a bold attempt to establish limits on Spanish authority and provide a political voice to the Dutch nobility. In presenting the petition to Margaret of Parma, the nobles expressed a deep dissatisfaction with Philip II's policies, carefully framing their resistance within terms of loyalty to the crown while seeking moderation of its more oppressive policies. Margaret's initial reaction was cautious, and she appeared to sympathize with the nobles to an extent. However, Spanish advisors downplayed the threat posed by the petitioners, with one courtier famously dismissing them as beggars, or Geuzen in Dutch, a term that would ironically become a proud symbol of resistance. The Compromise of Nobles represented a significant shift, as it marked the first organized effort by Dutch nobles to challenge Philip II's rule. Although Margaret made small concessions to appease the nobles, the petition planted the seeds for broader defiance, symbolizing a stand against foreign domination and triggering further resistance across the Netherlands. In August 1566, the simmering unrest across the Netherlands erupted into a movement of radical iconoclasm known as the Beeldenstorm, or iconoclastic fury. This wave of fervent Protestant zeal began in the town of Steenvoorde and quickly spread across the Low Countries. Discontented groups of Calvinists, emboldened by the Compromise of Nobles and frustrated by Spanish repression, attacked Catholic churches, monasteries and shrines, destroying images of saints, stained glass, altars and other religious artifacts they considered idolatrous. The beeldenstorm marked an overt and defiant public expression of resistance to the established Catholic order and Spanish rule. The underlying causes of the beeldenstorm were multifaceted. While it was primarily driven by religious motivations, economic pressures also played a role. The severe poverty and starvation of 1566 exacerbated popular grievances, and resentment toward the Catholic Church was heightened by the perception that it served the interests of the Spanish crown rather than the local population. For many Protestants, Catholic images and religious practices represented an oppressive power structure rather than genuine faith, and iconoclasm became a powerful means of challenging this authority. The beeldenstorm shocked Spanish officials and outraged King Philip II, who viewed the destruction as a direct affront to his authority. The event escalated tensions between the Dutch populace and Spanish forces, prompting Philip to respond with brutal repression. The Duke of Alba, one of Philip's most feared generals, was sent to restore order, and his establishment of the Council of Troubles, often called the Council of Blood, brought severe punishments upon those suspected of rebellion. The council executed thousands and imposed a reign of terror that galvanized even more opposition among the Dutch. Ultimately, the beeldenstorm became a rallying event for Protestant and anti-Spanish forces, drawing a clear line in the struggle for religious and political freedom and deepening the determination of the Dutch people to resist Spanish rule. The term Geuzen, or beggars, initially used disparagingly by Spanish officials to mock the Dutch nobles, was soon adopted as a badge of pride by rebels across the Netherlands. The Geuzen were a diverse group that included noble families, Protestant preachers, merchants, and the lower classes, unified by their opposition to Spanish rule and Catholic orthodoxy. As the situation in the Netherlands grew increasingly dire under the Duke of Alba's harsh reprisals, the Geuzen took on a more organized role in resisting Spanish forces, conducting raids on Spanish outposts and towns from the land and sea. The beeldenstorm had further radicalized the Geuzen, emboldening them to intensify their resistance. By embracing guerrilla tactics, such as ambushing Spanish supply lines and attacking strategic coastal positions, the Geuzen kept the Spanish forces under constant pressure. These actions proved crucial in escalating the conflict into the full-scale Dutch revolt, marking the beginning of an organized struggle that would last for decades and ultimately lead to Dutch independence. The compromise of nobles and the beeldenstorm were pivotal events that catalyzed the Dutch revolt, the protracted struggle that would eventually lead to Dutch independence. The compromise, by uniting various noble factions under a common cause, provided a model of organized resistance to Spanish authority and demonstrated the potential for collective action against oppressive rule. While the compromise itself was initially a peaceful plea, its failure to bring meaningful reform intensified the desire for change among the Dutch populace. The beeldenstorm in turn marked a dramatic escalation from passive resistance to open defiance. It was a declaration of both religious and political autonomy, rejecting the imposition of foreign doctrines and leadership. The subsequent crackdown by the Duke of Alba with his brutal reprisals and executions only solidified a national identity centered around resistance to oppression. Together, these events ignited the 80 Years' War, transforming localized discontent into a full-fledged movement for freedom. The rise of the Geuzen and the Dutch struggle for independence were deeply shaped by the compromise of nobles and the beeldenstorm. These events not only symbolized defiance, but galvanized a movement that would inspire one of history's longest and most resilient fights for freedom. The Dutch revolt, rooted in a desire for religious and political autonomy, would eventually result in the establishment of the Dutch Republic, a beacon of tolerance and independence in Europe. In their defiance, the Dutch paved the way for other nations' struggles, demonstrating that the will to resist oppression can, over time, reshape the course of history.